The shadow of a lone rider stretched long across the sun-parched earth of Wyoming Territory as Mason Stokes guided his weary horse toward what remained of his life. It was 1876, and after 3 years away fighting Comanche raids in Texas, he was returning to the homestead where his twin boys waited, assuming they still remembered their father's face. The ranch appeared on the horizon just as dusk painted the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. Mason noted the weathered fence posts, the sagging porch of the cabin he'd built with his own hands before Sarah took ill. His throat tightened at the memory of his wife's funeral, how he'd left his 5-year-old sons with his sister-in-law while he rode off to earn money as a hired gun. It had seemed the only way then. "Mr. Stokes, Lord Almighty, is that you?" Edna Watson, his late wife's older sister, bustled from the cabin door, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. Mason dismounted, his bones aching from the long journey. "It's me, Edna. Where are the boys?" "They're inside, been helping me with chores. They're good boys, Mason, despite everything." Her expression hardened slightly. "Though they ain't been the same since you left." "I'm back for good now," Mason said, removing his hat. "Got enough saved to make something of this place again." "Well, that's a blessing. But there's something you ought to know." Before she could finish, 2 small figures appeared in the doorway. At 8 years old, the twins had grown taller, leaner, with sun-browned faces that reminded him painfully of Sarah. "Pa?" The one on the left James called uncertainly. Mason swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. "It's me, boys." Neither child ran to him. Instead, they stood shoulder to shoulder, regarding him with wary eyes that had seen too much for their young age. "You been gone 3 winters," said Thomas, the quieter of the two. "I know. I'm sorry for that. But I'm home now. For good." Edna cleared her throat. "Boys, help your pa with his things. I need to finish supper." That night, after a stilted meal where Mason tried and failed to bridge the chasm between himself and his sons, Edna pulled him aside. "Those boys are scared of the dark, Mason. Every night it's the same nightmares, crying out for their ma. I've done what I could, but..." She sighed. "They need their father." Mason nodded, shame burning in his chest. "I'm here now. There's something else. I'm getting married next month. Henry Fulton proposed, and I've accepted." "That's wonderful, Edna. Truly. We'll be moving to Laramie. I can't take the boys with me. Henry's got 4 children of his own already." "You don't need to worry. They're my responsibility." That night, as the wind howled around the cabin, Mason was awakened by terrified whimpering. He found his sons huddled together in their shared bed, trembling. "What is it, boys?" he asked, lighting a small oil lamp. "The shadows," James whispered. "They move when it's dark." "Nothing there's gonna hurt you," Mason said, but the words felt hollow even to him. What did he know of comforting children? He'd left that to Sarah and then to Edna. "Aunt Edna always tells us stories," Thomas said accusingly. Mason sat awkwardly on the edge of their bed. "I don't know many stories. Ma used to sing," James offered. The silence stretched between them, filled with all Mason had missed. "I'll leave the lamp," he finally said, placing it on the small table between their beds. "Just for tonight." The next morning, Mason surveyed the ranch with fresh eyes. The barn needed repairs, the corral was falling apart, and the small herd of cattle had dwindled to barely a dozen. There was work to be done, and perhaps through work, he could find his way back to his sons. For 2 weeks, they fell into an uneasy routine. During the day, the boys helped with chores, and Mason did his best to teach them about ranching. At night, he left the lamp burning until the oil ran out, and still the boys would wake, frightened of shadows that seemed to haunt only them. Edna's wedding day arrived, and with it came her departure. She embraced the twins tightly, tears in her eyes. "You be good for your pa," she told them. "And Mason," she added in a lower voice, "there's a widow woman who lives about 2 miles east of here, Victoria Henderson. Her husband died in the same fever that took Sarah. She's been alone these past years, but she's good folk. Might be worth paying her a visit if you need help with the boys." Mason nodded, though he had no intention of seeking out a stranger's help. He'd manage on his own. But that night, a fierce storm rolled in across the plains. Wind rattled the shutters, and thunder shook the cabin's very foundations. When lightning struck close enough to illuminate the entire room in a ghostly flash, both boys screamed in terror. Mason tried everything: reassurances, stern words, even anger, but nothing calmed their fears. When Thomas began sobbing for his mother, something in Mason broke. "Get dressed," he ordered, reaching for his own clothes. "We're going for a ride." "In the storm?" James asked, wide-eyed. "Yes, there's someone I think might help us." Mason saddled his horse and lifted both boys up, one in front of him and one behind. The rain pelted them mercilessly as they rode east through the darkness, guided only by occasional lightning flashes and Mason's spotty memory of the landscape. After what felt like hours, a faint light appeared in the distance, a single golden point in the vast blackness. As they drew closer, Mason could make out a small cabin, sturdier than his own, with a well-tended garden barely visible in the downpour. He dismounted, helped the boys down, and approached the door. Before he could knock, it swung open to reveal a woman holding a candle. Victoria Henderson was not what Mason had expected. In his mind, widows were bent, gray creatures. Victoria was tall and straight-backed, with copper-red hair pulled into a simple knot at her nape. Her face was striking rather than pretty, with high cheekbones and clear gray eyes that regarded him with surprise rather than fear. "You're drenched," she said simply, stepping aside to let them enter. "And you've brought children out in this weather?" "Mason Stokes," he said, removing his dripping hat. "These are my sons, James and Thomas. Edna Watson, her sister, married my brother. She mentioned you might." He faltered, suddenly aware of how presumptuous it was to arrive at a stranger's home in the middle of a stormy night. Victoria's expression softened as she looked at the twins, who stood shivering in their soaked clothes. "Let's get you dry first, then we can talk." She moved with quiet efficiency, bringing blankets and setting water to boil for tea. The cabin was small but immaculately kept, with handmade curtains at the windows and a bookshelf filled with volumes Mason couldn't imagine having time to read. Most striking were the candles, dozens of them placed throughout the main room, casting a warm, steady light that seemed to hold the storm at bay. "You're not afraid of fire?" Mason asked, nodding toward a particularly large candle on the mantel. Victoria poured tea into 4 mismatched cups. "I find it more comforting than frightening. Light keeps the darkness at bay." James, who had been watching her intently, spoke up. "We're afraid of the dark." Victoria sat beside him, her expression serious. "Many people are. I was too, for a long time after my husband died." "Our ma died," Thomas volunteered. "Then Pa went away." Mason winced at the simple truth of it. "And now he's back," Victoria said gently. "That's good, isn't it?" The boys exchanged glances but didn't answer. "The candles help," she continued, gesturing around the room. "Charles, my husband, taught me to make them. After he died, it gave me something to focus on. Now I make enough to trade in town for things I need." "They smell nice," James said, inhaling deeply. "That's lavender in that one. Helps with sleep." She smiled at Mason. "Would you like some tea, Mr. Stokes? You look half frozen yourself." As the storm raged outside, Victoria told the boys stories, not fairy tales, but simple accounts of her own childhood in Pennsylvania, her journey west with Charles, the things she'd learned about surviving alone. The twins listened, rapt, their earlier terror forgotten. Mason watched in amazement as she drew his sons out, getting them to talk about their fears in a way they never had with him. "The dark is just absence," she told them. "It can't hurt you itself. But I understand how it feels when it seems like the shadows are moving." "Pa says we're too old to be scared," Thomas said quietly. Victoria glanced at Mason, something like challenge in her eyes. "Everyone gets scared sometimes, even grown men." "Not Pa," James insisted. "He fought Indians in Texas. Aunt Edna told us." Mason cleared his throat. "That's not exactly true, son. I was plenty scared many nights, sleeping out under the stars, not knowing what might be watching from the darkness." The boys stared at him in disbelief. "What did you do?" Thomas asked finally. "Kept a fire going," Mason admitted. "Just like these candles. Light helps." Eventually, the storm passed and the boys drifted to sleep on Victoria's small settee, wrapped in blankets and bathed in candlelight. Mason found himself sitting across from her at her kitchen table, a comfortable silence between them. "I apologize for imposing," he said finally. "I didn't know where else to turn." "Children need more than food and shelter, Mr. Stokes," she replied, her voice gentle but direct. "They need to feel safe, especially after losing their mother." "I'm not very good at that part," he admitted. "Their aunt was better with them, but she's married now and gone to Laramie. And you've been gone as well. I had to find work. The ranch wasn't producing enough after Sarah died. I thought." He trailed off, the excuses sounding hollow even to his own ears. Victoria studied him for a long moment. "I'm not judging you, Mr. Stokes. Life out here forces hard choices on all of us. But those boys need more than just your presence. They need to know you understand their fears." Mason looked over at his sleeping sons, their faces peaceful for the first time in weeks. "Would you?" He hesitated. "Would you be willing to teach me to make candles like yours? For the boys?" A small smile curved Victoria's lips. "I could do that." The next morning, Mason and the twins returned home, each carrying a candle Victoria had given them. That night, for the first time since his return, the boys slept soundly, comforted by the gentle light and the lingering scent of lavender. 3 days later, Mason saddled the horse again and rode back to Victoria's cabin, this time alone. He found her in her garden, a broad-brimmed hat shielding her face from the summer sun. "Mr. Stokes," she greeted him, straightening. "Are the boys still sleeping better?" "They are. Thank you for that." He shifted uncomfortably. "I was wondering if your offer still stands to teach me about the candle making." Victoria's smile reached her eyes, crinkling the corners. "Of course. Would you like to start today?" That afternoon became the first of many visits. Mason learned the patient art of dipping wicks, mixing scented oils, and pouring wax. Victoria proved to be a skilled teacher, firm but kind, with a dry wit that surprised laughter from him when he least expected it. As summer ripened toward fall, Mason found reasons to visit more frequently. He helped Victoria repair her roof before the winter storms, brought game when his hunting was successful, and in return, she sent him home with candles and bread and, increasingly, smiles that lingered in his mind long after he'd ridden away. The boys noticed the change in their father. He was more patient with them now, more willing to listen to their fears instead of dismissing them. Sometimes they would accompany him on his visits to Miss Victoria, as they called her, and she would teach them things too: how to identify edible plants, how to carve simple toys from wood, how to read from the books she treasured. One evening in late September, as Mason and Victoria sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the plains gold, she asked the question he'd been avoiding. "Why did you really leave them, Mason, after their mother died?" He stared out at the horizon, the truth rising in his throat like bile. I couldn't bear to look at them. They have her eyes, both of them. Every time they cried for her, it was like losing her all over again. Victoria was silent for a long moment. And now I see them. Not just Sarah in them, but themselves, who they are, who they're becoming. He turned to look at her. That's because of you. She shook her head. You would have found your way back to them eventually. I'm not so sure of that. As autumn deepened, Mason invited Victoria to join them for Sunday dinners at the ranch. The boys would dash out to meet her wagon, competing for her attention with stories of their week. The cabin, once so sparse and functional, began to change. Curtains appeared at the windows. A rag rug covered the rough floor, and candles burned in every room, keeping the shadows at bay. In town, people noticed. Gossip spread about the handsome rancher and the widow woman. Some claimed it was just convenience, a man needed help with children, after all. Others, more romantic or perhaps more perceptive, saw the way Mason's eyes followed Victoria across a room, or how she seemed to glow in his presence. On a crisp November evening, Mason rode to Victoria's cabin alone. He found her at her workbench, carefully pouring scented wax into molds. You're early, she said, glancing up with a smile. I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow. Mason removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. The boys are with Mrs. Parker for the night. I wanted to speak with you alone. Victoria set down her ladle, wiping her hands on her apron. Is something wrong? No, he said quickly. Nothing's wrong. It's just... He took a deep breath. I've been thinking about the future, about what the boys need, about what I need. She stood very still, her eyes on his face. When Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over. I couldn't imagine ever feeling. He struggled for words. But then you came into our lives with your candles and your stories, and you showed my boys that darkness doesn't have to be frightening. You showed me the same thing. Victoria's cheeks flushed pink. Mason, please let me finish. I know it hasn't been that long, and maybe I'm being too forward, but I need to ask. He stepped closer, reaching for her hand. Victoria Henderson, would you consider becoming my wife? A mother to my boys? A partner in whatever life brings us? Tears welled in Victoria's clear gray eyes. Are you certain? I'm not Sarah. I can never replace her. I don't want you to replace her, Mason said firmly. You're different, and that's as it should be. I love you for who you are, your strength, your kindness, the way you face the world on your own terms. A tear slipped down Victoria's cheek. Then yes, Mason Stokes, I will marry you. The wedding took place on Christmas Eve, a small affair in the town's church with only the twins, the pastor, and a few close neighbors as witnesses. Victoria wore a simple blue dress with a sprig of evergreen at her collar, and Mason thought he'd never seen a more beautiful sight. That night, as snow fell gently outside the cabin that was now their shared home, the four of them sat before the fire, surrounded by Victoria's candles. The boys were subdued, watching their father and new stepmother with curious eyes. I have something for each of you, Victoria said, reaching for a small wooden box. From it, she withdrew 3 candles, larger and more elaborate than any she had made before. These are special, she explained, handing one to each of the twins and the third to Mason. They're made with beeswax that never fully hardens. As they burn down, you can reshape them. They'll last for years if you care for them properly. Like a family, James said thoughtfully, examining his candle. Victoria smiled. Exactly like a family. As the boys prepared for bed that night, Mason found Victoria standing at the window, gazing out at the snow-covered landscape. Are you happy? He asked, slipping his arms around her waist. She leaned back against him. Very. Though I worry about the boys. Change isn't always easy for children. They already love you, Mason assured her. You gave them back the night. That's a powerful gift. Later, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Victoria whispered, Tell me about Sarah. Mason tensed. You don't want to hear about her. I do, Victoria insisted. She was their mother. She was your wife. She'll always be part of who you are, who they are. I don't want her to be a ghost between us. Slowly, hesitantly at first, Mason began to speak. He told Victoria about Sarah's laugh, her stubbornness, her dreams for the ranch and for their sons. As he spoke, he felt a weight lifting from his chest, years of unspoken grief finally finding voice. When he finished, Victoria kissed him softly. Thank you for sharing her with me. Thank you for not being afraid of her memory, Mason replied, or of the darkness. Winter gave way to spring, and the ranch flourished under their combined efforts. Victoria's practical knowledge of gardening and animal husbandry complemented Mason's ranching skills. Together, they expanded the herd, repaired the long-neglected buildings, and transformed the homestead into a place of warmth and light. The boys thrived as well. Under Victoria's patient tutelage, their reading improved, and she insisted they continue their education even as they learned the practical skills of ranch life from their father. Most importantly, they no longer feared the night. The ever-present candles became less necessary as their confidence grew, though each boy kept his special candle on a shelf beside his bed. One evening in early summer, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, James asked, Pa, do you think Ma would have liked Victoria? Mason considered the question carefully. I think she would have. Your mother valued honesty and hard work above all things. Victoria has both in abundance. Plus, Thomas added, she makes the best biscuits. Victoria laughed. Is that all I'm good for? Biscuits? No, James said seriously. You're not afraid of anything. That helps us be brave too. Victoria's smile faded slightly. That's not quite true, James. Everyone is afraid of something. What are you afraid of? Thomas asked, wide-eyed. She glanced at Mason before answering. For a long time after Charles died, I was afraid of being alone forever, of never having a family again. But now you have us, James said firmly. Yes, she agreed, reaching out to ruffle his hair. Now I have you. That night, after the boys were asleep, Victoria joined Mason on the porch. The summer sky blazed with stars, a vast canopy of light against the darkness. I've been thinking, she said, settling beside him on the bench. Perhaps we should invite Edna and her new husband to visit. The boys miss her, and it would be good for them to maintain that connection to their mother's family. Mason nodded slowly. You're right. I'll write to her tomorrow. And there's something else. Victoria took his hand, placing it gently on her stomach. The family is going to grow a bit larger come winter. Mason stared at her, momentarily speechless. A baby? She nodded, a mixture of joy and apprehension in her eyes. Are you happy about it? Happy doesn't begin to cover it, he said, gathering her into his arms. Though I'm a bit terrified as well. It's been a while since I've had a baby in the house. We'll manage together, Victoria assured him, as we've done with everything else. The news of the baby cemented their family in ways Mason hadn't anticipated. The twins became fiercely protective of Victoria, insisting on helping with chores they deemed too strenuous for her. They debated endlessly about whether they wanted a brother or sister, and what the baby's name should be. As Victoria's pregnancy progressed, she continued making her candles, though now Mason often worked alongside her, the process having become a shared ritual between them. They would talk as they worked about the ranch, the boys, their hopes for the future. Sometimes they simply enjoyed the comfortable silence that had grown between them, a peaceful counterpoint to the busy days of ranch life. In December, Just after the first heavy snow of the season, Victoria gave birth to a daughter. They named her Hope, for what she represented to both of them: a new beginning, a promise of light after darkness. The night they brought her home, a blizzard raged outside, wind howling around the cabin's sturdy walls. Inside, candles burned in every window, their steady flames a beacon against the storm. The twins insisted on staying close, watching in fascination as Victoria nursed the tiny girl. "She's so small," Thomas whispered, reaching out tentatively to touch the baby's curled fist. "You were that small once," Mason told him. "Were we afraid of the dark when we were babies?" James asked. Victoria exchanged a glance with Mason. "Most babies aren't afraid of anything, as long as they're warm and fed and loved." "We'll make sure she's never afraid," Thomas declared. "We'll teach her about the candles. And about the stars," James added. "Pa's been showing us the constellations." As the boys continued their solemn plans for their sister's education, Mason moved to sit beside Victoria on the bed, carefully sliding an arm around her shoulders. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly, echoing the question he'd asked on their wedding night. Victoria looked around the room at the sleeping infant in her arms, the protective twins sitting cross-legged on the floor, the man beside her who had come so far from the broken father who'd appeared at her door during a storm. Outside, the blizzard continued, but within their home, all was warmth and light. "Yes," she said simply, "I'm happy." 2 years later, on a warm summer evening, Mason stood in the doorway of his home, watching as Victoria sat in the grass with their children. Hope, now a sturdy toddler with her mother's red hair and her father's determined chin, was trying to catch fireflies, shrieking with delight when they blinked just beyond her reach. The twins, almost 11 now and growing tall, took turns lifting her up to get closer to the glowing insects. As dusk deepened into true night, Mason expected the usual call for candles or lamps. Instead, James flopped onto his back in the grass, pointing up at the emerging stars. "Look, Hope," he said to his little sister. "That bright one is the North Star. Pa says it always shows you the way home." Hope babbled excitedly, reaching toward the sky with pudgy hands. Thomas stretched out beside them. "I like the dark now," he announced. "You can only see the stars when it's dark." Victoria caught Mason's eye across the yard, a smile of quiet triumph on her face. It had been many months since either boy had asked for a candle at bedtime, though each still kept his special candle on a shelf, a reminder of how far they had come. Later, after the children were asleep, Mason and Victoria stood together on the porch, his arm around her waist as they gazed up at the star-filled sky. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I used to think happiness was something that happened to other people. After Sarah died, I couldn't imagine feeling anything but grief and guilt." Victoria leaned her head against his shoulder. "And now I know that happiness isn't something that happens to you. It's something you build, day by day, through choices and effort and love." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You taught me that, Victoria. You and your candles." She smiled up at him, her face illuminated by starlight. "The candles just helped us see what was already there, the strength in the boys, the love you had for them even when you were lost in your own pain. And the love I've found for you," Mason added, pulling her close. "That's the brightest light of all." As they stood together in the darkness that was no longer something to be feared, the vast Wyoming sky spread above them like a promise, infinite, mysterious, and beautiful in its own right, not despite the darkness but because of it. Inside the cabin, the children slept peacefully, untroubled by shadows. The special candles stood on their shelves, unlit but ready if needed. And in the hearts of the family that had been forged through grief and courage and the simple act of sharing light in the darkness, there burned a flame that would never go out, the enduring light of love that had transformed them all.